There you go.
All right, we're rolling. All right, so super fired up here. We got Will Greenberg on today. For those of you that don't know Will, and I'll let him kind of elaborate on at least his kind of path and some of the things that he's done, which is what we're going to get into a little bit. But Will and I have kind of known each other for a few years more, just kind of known of each other. And since my time at Buffalo here, Will spent some time together. Um, Obviously, a unbelievably intelligent guy. We see eye to eye on a lot of things, but just really good conversations we've had in the past. And so I definitely was fired to get you on. And I think the ideas and the things you've experienced are great for our industry to hear. Not enough people think the way that you think, and I think it's where the shape of our industry needs to go. So definitely fired up to have you on. But kind of want to just start off by just kind of telling people, obviously you're with the Bills now, but just a little bit about your path and just kind of about your background, and then we'll get rolling into one of your favorite trips I'm excited to talk about.
Oh yeah, and I'll start off. I love the fact that you called me intelligent and then said that we think the same, which is awesome.
I literally write that down.
Yeah,
I'm
that's
really
great.
intelligent. Obviously, we see eye to eye.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Which is absolutely true. I love it. Yeah, so I'm with the Bills now. I've had quite a long and interesting journey. I actually I played baseball in college and was just a meathead, and I knew I wanted to be in strength conditioning, and so I saw that as an opportunity to go and get a master's degree. So I was a GA actually with basketball at Clemson to begin, and after about 6 months, my boss there, Preston Green, got the job at Florida and brought me with him. So I stopped doing my master's degree, and I said, "Oh, I get a job. That's perfectly fine for me." So I went to University of Florida with men's and women's basketball and golf and tennis there for another 6 months. And then an opportunity arose. I went to Appalachian State again with basketball. I was there for a couple of years. And then just through some conferences and going and learning, I had met Tim Caron. We met at a Poliquin conference, actually. And he got the job at West Point, called me up one day and asked me if I wanted to come to West Point with him. And I've been an Army football fan my whole life, so that was such a unique opportunity. It's so cool, once in a lifetime opportunity. So I jumped on that and spent a few years with him, Darren Mustin, and Brian Phillips, which was an unbelievable time. We had a great time developing those players, made some lifelong relationships with those players. And I'm so grateful for that opportunity. From there, I knew I wanted to be in charge somewhere and be a head strength conditioning coach. So the opportunity presented itself at Southern Utah University. I moved myself and my wife out to Utah and spent a year there. And then the NFL called. The Buffalo Bills got my name from Tim, actually, the head strength coach here, Eric Ciano, had worked with him at Georgia Tech. So just, word of mouth got to the Buffalo Bills and spent this is my third season here, and just learning and loving everything we do.
Yeah, no, I think that your path, just with how much variety you've had in it, different levels, different sports, it gives you such a unique perspective, and I think it's one of the things that definitely separates you for sure. But so let's talk about your trip you took. So obviously you went this year, and I won't steal too much of your thunder, but and we really haven't completely debriefed on it, more really detail oriented. But let's just dive in. Let's start there.
Yeah, so I got the opportunity to go to Australia for a couple weeks in February of this year. A lot of the research that we read, a lot of the cutting edge topics in sports performance come out of Australia. So I wanted to go down and see what was going on. It's easy to listen to a lecture or speak to someone or watch a seminar and hear what someone's doing, but without really understanding the context of what's going on, it's very hard to draw and extract anything out of those environments and apply to what we're doing without seeing it firsthand. So, like I said, I got the opportunity to go down there for a couple of weeks, and I met with 5 different teams, 3 Australian Rules Football League teams and 2 National Rugby League teams. The cool thing, actually, coincidentally, they just had their grand final a week and a half ago, which is like our Super Bowl. And in the semifinals and finals, the 3 teams that I visited were all in the semifinals, and then 2 made it to the finals. So I've actually been looking back in my notes, and referring to that just to see what I had written down, what I had seen. And I'm going to debrief with the people that I met with again through email or phone conversations and just see if what I had written down or observed translated all the way through the season and had any impact on getting them into the semifinals or into the grand final. So it was a cool coincidence, but it was nice that I was rooting for them all season. It was really enlightening to me when I went down there. Really, it's a different context. It's a different environment to what we have here. Sport is approached completely differently. And I think that's the biggest difference, is that the way they approach their team sport lends them to be able to be successful in different ways. Some things that would completely fail in our environment, in the college and the NFL, and some things that you can pick out and extract and apply to this model and succeed really well. For example, the entire culture of Australia is very laid back, and it lends towards a lot more autonomy on the players. Whereas in our culture, a lot of things are militaristic, are very discipline oriented. I mean, if you think of football, it's all discipline based, where that doesn't translate between the sports. So if we were to go over to an Australian rules football league team and try to implement what we do, it might not be successful, and vice versa. And you see that kind of disconnect as performance starts to branch between different countries. People from different countries come here, we go other places. And I think sometimes that is disconnect. But if you're able to critically think and see that in its context and say, wow, that is something that I can see in my environment being applicable, then it's very beneficial. And that's really what I went down there to go see, is have conversations, observe, have conversations with people, and see what we could extract out of that to bring back to Buffalo.
Yeah. What I think that's first off, that's an awesome perspective from the standpoint of understanding that. I think when someone goes and has that experience, the first thing they just take it as that it's better than what we're doing, but they don't necessarily absorb it as this might not fit all the way into our scheme of how we're doing things. So I think that's massively important. Was there something that in general you looked at and you just went, wow, like that is something that here in America, we're just not there yet? And what was that?
I think they did an unbelievable job of monitoring their players on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis. They had a rolling script of where those players are at all times. And it was just built into the structure of their days. Players would come in and they would use a lot of the similar tools that we have. Some of the, the NordBord, the groin bar, just a pain provocation test, like a single leg hop, an ASLR. And players were autonomous in coming in, running the software themselves, and doing that in the beginning of the day, at the beginning of a week. And that being done could then red flag a player for X, Y, and Z. It could, give a little bit more information and drive how practice may be structured, what the lift may change to, what extra exercises those people needed to do. And to me, that was really impressive. But again, the players being autonomous to that, they had been used to doing that coming up through high school. In the development leagues, because there's really not a collegiate system. It's a development league, almost like a JV. So once they got to the highest level, they had been wearing catapult units since they were 14 years old. They knew what that data meant. They knew how important that data was. And they were actually interested in, hey, did I hit my high speeds? Did I run enough? Did I run too much? Is there anything else that I need to do? Which you don't see that as much, just because the environment that we create, it doesn't lend towards that as much. And there's nothing wrong with that. Again, like, I'm not saying one's better than the other. It's just understanding the context. You can't just take that and say, oh, that's what we should be doing here. You have to say, okay, well, how do we make those numbers important for our players, for our team? What does that look like, and how is that applied?
Do you feel like their outcome is different? I mean, like you look at all these things. Do you feel like they're having less injuries than we are having here in America?
I can't speak to that. It's a completely different sport. you see different injuries. You see a lot of hamstring injuries over there because of the nature of the sport in terms of kicking and the amount of high-speed running. I mean, they're covering 15 kilometers in a game.
Yep.
Meanwhile, they're kicking a ball as hard as they can.
Yeah.
So you can't speak to say that they're seeing more or less injuries, and I don't think anyone's figured out the injury prediction model yet, nor will they ever. It's just too complex. There's too many variables to that. But one of the best things that I heard or saw there was the idea of making the most good decisions in a day that you can. Like we're never going to be able to predict an injury and say, well, we prevented that injury from happening today. We're not going to be able to say that, but we know we can lay our head down at night and say, I made the best decisions for that player, for the team today. I know that was the best decision to keep them as safe as possible, or to push them harder, or to pull back, or to do X, whatever it may be in that setting. That's the best decision because it's evidence-based. It's best practice.
Yeah, I mean, I think where we're losing the battle, at least in my opinion, just from everything I'm reading and everything I'm seeing, is we're spending so much time not doing what you just said, but we're spending time trying to rationalize an irrational system. And it's never it's so complex. And we were just talking, we just shot an episode with a chiropractor that works with the Browns. And we were talking about this same thing. And I was just talking about how in my career, I've had a bunch of guys that have weak ass, that have had weak ass hamstrings, shitty work ethic, don't do much, don't have great, speed exposure, and they can make the entire season without ever having a hamstring issue. And then I'll have a guy who's the most optimally resistant athlete with strong hamstrings and has a great eccentric load, has high speed exposure, and he has a hamstring tweak. And it's just, it's never going to be a foolproof model. We can't ever purely rationalize it because there's too many factors that go into it.
Yeah.
What do you think is the balance, or where are you at in your head right now with the balance between those things?
Yeah, I think that you have to we always get zoomed in on things. Like people are zoomed in on Nordic curls. People are zoomed in on full depth squatting. People are zoomed in on, hey, this is a must. I have to do this. This is what my program relies on. But when things happen like that, when the example you gave, you have to zoom out and say, okay, well, let's look at the bigger picture. And we have to question our deeply held beliefs. And that's the hardest thing to do. You've done the same thing for the last 5-10 years and you've had good success. Well, who's to tell you to zoom out and do something different? But that's what we constantly have to do. And that's how we grow and that's how we adapt. And we start to look at the different research or the different ideas and say, okay, well, what is it really telling me, right? Like take the Nordic hamstring, for example. Everyone's very zoomed in on that particular exercise. But really, that was just an exercise picked to look at super maximal eccentric loading. I could name you a 10, 15, 20 exercises that you could super maximally load a hamstring in a certain way. And then you can dissect it even more. Okay, well, is it hip extension or knee flexion that we're looking at in terms of hamstring function? Because now we can look at super maximal loading of the hamstring in two different ways. What adaptation is that truly making in terms of the fascicle length instead of, in series versus parallel fascicles. Right. What adaptation are we trying to make of the architecture of the muscle? Like you could go on for days and days and days and talk about, well, what is the actual purpose of what we're looking at there? So if you zoom out and you say, okay, well, this guy's hamstrings are sorry, let me rephrase that. If you can zoom out and see that the Nordic hamstring is not the end all be all, right? And say, okay, well, we just need to eccentrically load the hamstring in a knee flexion type way. Okay, well, the Nordic hamstring curl is a great option, but there's also a lot of other ways to do it, right? And if you need to do it through hip extension, okay, are we doing a super maximal RDL? There's different ways to do that, but people get very zoomed in on that. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, but I guess to elaborate on it, what do you think what is the answer? I mean, does injury prevention lie on a horizontal line, and these are the 20 things we need to do to prevent injury, or is it on a vertical line that is, this is the most important, this is kind of important. This is pretty important. This is, you should do it, but it's not that important. I mean, like, where does that fall in your head?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I mean, the biggest predictor of injury is previous injury, right? So that's always number one. Strength cures a lot of things, right? The strength of the tissue that we're looking at and the resiliency of it. But then there's a lot of other different factors that play into it. And I don't think there's any hierarchy of one thing is more important than the other. I just think that you're looking at almost like a perfect storm, right? As multiple factors start to build up, things that we can quantify or things that we know or things that we can track, as they start to build up, when's the last time that they hit high speeds? How strong and symmetrical are their hamstrings? What is their previous injury history? If you can determine what is the actual architecture and shape of their muscle tissue, is there atrophy of the muscle tissue? What is their then that goes into load management. How much load are they performing on a acute to chronic workload ratio? All those things combine to create a perfect storm. And sometimes people will get through that storm. Sometimes people won't. Sometimes you need more factors to predict an injury or for an injury to occur than others. But I don't think that there's, I mean, if we had figured out injuries, I think someone would have the model and be making a lot more money than we are.
No kidding. Yeah. So if you had let's say you have an athlete come to you and he has, well, let's just use that example that you use. Let's say you have an athlete who came to you and he's had 6 lifetime left hamstring strains.
Mm-hmm.
What is his program going to look like differently than a guy that comes into you and has never had hamstring issues before?
Yeah, I mean, well, I guess it also depends on, like, if you put them on a table, what does that look like? Is it, can we determine whether it's neurological? Is it the scar tissue of the previous 6 hamstrings? Are there ways that we can get the scar tissue out? Is there a way that we can start to get the brain to fire a little bit or co-contract with the hamstring? What is the actual mechanism of why that keeps getting hurt? So I guess it depends on that as well. But in a certain way, you're going to have to, once you determine what the mechanism is, then you can start to attack that, right? Is there atrophy of the muscle tissue there? Well, then we need to concentrically use some concentric dominant exercises to increase the cross-sectional area of the muscle tissue.
Yeah.
Is it really weak eccentrically? Well, then we know that we need to eccentrically load and eccentrically bias that hamstring in some way. And there are plenty of ways to do that. Nordic hamstring one, the K box is a great example. Accentuated eccentric single leg RDLs, specifically on that side, knowing that that's going to be one of the weaker side, and then also checking for, is there some type of a compensation on the other hamstring? Are we now worrying about the other hamstring having an overload of work just because the other one's so weak? So I don't know if I can give you a specific how that would look, because the context kind of matters of what the issue is there.
Yeah. This is a little off topic, and for whatever reason, I've just seen you use a 45 degree a lot. Do you like the hypers? You guys have most of those in the Bills facility, right?
Yeah.
Do you notice yourself using that more than like a glute ham machine? And if so, like what are you all doing on the 45 degree?
Yeah, there's some good research in terms of the specific hamstring exercise and what head of the hamstring that is biased. So biceps fem is going to be more biased on a 45 degree hyperextension with a slight knee bend. Whereas the Nordic hamstring curl may bias the other heads, semi-mem, right, and also the biceps fem. But if there's a certain, if you get an MRI back and there's a certain head of the hamstring that's strained, and you want to bias that so that you can get it stronger or prevent atrophy or whatever it is, then you can select that specific exercise to make sure that you're hitting wherever the injury is.
Solid. Yeah, I meant to ask you that like a month ago. I was going to call you and ask you, and I just,
Yeah.
for whatever reason, didn't remember till this very
Hmm.
particular moment.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I mean, you mentioned player load a little bit, and we've just started diving in this year to player load, and I think it's definitely a hot topic. And once again, it's like what you said, right? Like I feel like people are either zoomed in or they're zoomed out all the way. It's either we live by player load and we're gonna work everything around player load, and on the other end, it's no, I don't believe in that. We're gonna run our kids into the ground,
Yeah.
and who cares? So I guess in your eyes, one, where does that lie in the big picture as far as where are you at with it, and where are you at with it as far as is that a good predecessor of can we help potentially to reduce injuries by really paying attention to player load?
Yeah. I mean, I think again, that's one of those variables of the perfect storm. Um, Anecdotally, I'm sure everyone's noticed that when you push a kid too hard, he gets injured. And anecdotally, you could also say when you don't prepare the athlete, he gets injured as well. So finding that, quote unquote sweet spot, which I know is controversial, but preparing systematically, I mean, the idea of systematically preparing someone by progressing their load seems to make sense to me, right? And as you start to normalize that player load, getting outside of that zone for too long, again, makes sense to me that you're putting someone at risk. Now, that also, again, is just one piece of the puzzle. You can continue to get outside of that zone, and someone that's strong may be resilient to injury. Again, like it's somewhat of a guess, I suppose, but you need to me, you should understand the player's load because it is something that you can track. And if
Right.
it's trackable and it's objective data, you can build yourself a better idea of how safe are we,
Yeah.
right? How safe is the player? Is the player getting better, more resilient, more robust?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the place I keep going back to is Connor and I especially talk about this is it's just preparedness, and it's collecting normative data, and where I see it most useful isn't necessarily day to day, but it's all right at the end of this season we'll be able to look and we'll be able to look and see, okay, this is what our normal camp practice was like, this is what the progression was like, this is what a normal Tuesday and Wednesday is like for us. So why would you not use those numbers or that normative data as you prepare guys for that stimulus? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's
Yeah.
as we all know, that the most injuries in camp happen in the first 4 days. It's no rhyme as to why it happens. It's because the guys aren't prepared for that load.
Sure.
They're not getting overworked. They're just underprepared for whatever is coming their way. So if we can know that and we can prepare them for that, is that not the most useful tool we can have with player load management?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a simple way to look at it. I think there's probably complexity that we don't even know about yet in terms of
Yeah.
that.
No.
I mean, think about the first day of camp, how anxious players are.
Yep.
Anxiety plays a huge role in injury, and they might have not slept very well because they were so anxious. And we know
Yeah.
that under 6 hours of sleep is going to increase your chance of soft tissue injury. So in the things that we can control, that's a big thing, is the things that we can control, which is how they prepare, what their loads are on a certain day. I think those things are important to understand and at least track so that we're doing best practice.
Yeah. You think we would be better off as a profession as continuing just to hone in on those things that we can control? Or do you think it'd be worth starting to look down those avenues of really trying to educate guys on how to cope with anxiety, sleep strategies, those kind of things?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think taking a more holistic approach of shaping the human being is going to be beneficial. Sometimes we forget that we don't just have robots that do everything else right and are just numbers on a page that, hey, the load says this, the load says this. This is exactly what we need to be doing. Same thing with what we now know about 1RMs and what we probably could have known without the research, that it could fluctuate 15% from day to day. Right? So a guy comes in the weight room and you're supposed to hit 90%. Well, it's not a robot you're just systematically progressing. There's a lot of things that go into that. So how are you shaping their environment? How are you holistically wrapping your arms around someone so that they can be better coming in the next day, so that they can be more prepared or more resilient, more robust?
Where do you think if you were running a collegiate program today, we've talked about how NFL and collegiate, it's apples and oranges. It's freaking different. Obviously, the cultural set, the age, all those kind of things. There's the mat drills, the county fair type things, all those things we've talked about. Where I guess philosophically, where are you at with if you were to take over a college program tomorrow? What would be some of the basis of your training philosophies, and how would you and being intelligent to player load, being intelligent to those kind of things, where would your balance be?
The philosophy question has always made me laugh because philosophy is a theoretical discussion, right? And I like to think more of, okay, well, how would I apply my knowledge base to the situation that I'm given? That's really more the way that I look at it. And what I would apply is creating an environment, a collaborative environment with both coaches, strength coaches, players, and anyone involved in the process to develop, as we are strength coaches, develop physical qualities that are transferable to their sport. And with that collaborative environment, there needs to be some subjective and some objective physical qualities that need to be developed. So sitting down with a coach and saying, okay, this is this player. This is what we see in the weight room in terms of their whatever test you want to use, strong, powerful, explosive, however you want to track those objective data. Say, what are you seeing on the field? Well, he's not very strong in this position. He needs to get faster here, here, and here. Well, do those match up? Do those correlates match up? Do those KPIs match up? Or are we on completely different pages? And if we are, well, what is the reason of that? Is that because his stance is not good in football? Is that because he just lacks the ability to create force quickly, and he's always getting beat off the ball, so he now plays weak? Like those things need to match up, and they need to come to a determination collaboratively of how does this player get better? We know that we can develop physical qualities. We can develop strength. We can develop power. We can develop rate of force development. What doesn't matter if it doesn't transfer to sport? Not everyone needs to be training for strength. Not everyone needs to be training for speed. They need to be training what's going to apply to making them better at what their coach is seeing, because that's what we're doing. We're trying to support them at becoming a better football player. So there's a lot of individualization in that. So logistically, I would need to set up my staff in the room to make sure that with all the chaos that is going on, we can control that. And with that comes a little bit of autonomy as you earn the trust of each other, both the player and the coach. Autonomy on the player to get what is specifically needed for them to be better done. Because you can't be holding their hand all the time. Because that's what I see a lot in college, and that's what I did when I was in the college setting too. And as I've started to adapt, the way that I think is we're trying to get massive amount of people through in the same program all the time. That might train the bell curve and might get some people a lot stronger, but is it really transferring into the sport, into developing the physical qualities that they need? Because everyone's so different. You can have the same position, a guy is super strong on the field but lacks quickness, where the guy who's competing for the same spot is very quick but is very weak. Those guys need completely different programs, so they need different physical qualities to be trained. So you need to set up the environment, both from the program to the logistics and structure of the room, to make sure that you're encompassing everything that you need. And then culturally, which is a huge piece of it because it's all a system, the interactions need to be intentional with every player that you have, every coach that you have. The way that you talk to someone, the conversations that you have, and I'm not saying it needs to be scheming and pre-planned, but it needs to be driving towards something bigger than just, hey, how you doing? Hey, that was a good squat. It needs to be intentional in the way that you talk to someone and the way that you interact with someone and the collisions that are made throughout the day, because that's how a culture is really built. They know that you care because of that. the more intentional you are with the way you talk to someone, the more they know you care, and the more you can ask them to do, and then the more you can ask them to be autonomous, and they trust you and believe in what's going on. And that's really how I see what my quote unquote philosophy, but more my application of what my knowledge base is.
Yeah. I mean, I think one thing I definitely argue with people the most is, I guess probably, I don't know, it's maybe a little old now, but position specific was such a hot coin term, in our industry. And I straight up, I don't speak in absolutes very often, but I don't really believe in position specific. I believe in deficiency specific. And I don't care if you're a kicker, if you're a quarterback, if you're a wide receiver, an offensive guard, you're going to train to whatever you're deficient at, and it doesn't matter what position you play. Now, there's general qualities that every athlete needs to possess. There's general things that we can do in a weight room that are going to benefit the masses, but it comes down to the details to me, where you adjust program isn't based off of, okay, linebackers go over here, and you guys are going to do pause squats. It's deficient. You're reactive strength deficient. You go over there, you have this movement. You're muscular strength deficient. You go over here, you do this movement. But the thing that I love is, and I don't know that I've done this collaboratively, is the KPIs from the weight room to the field of play, and talking to those coaches, and not just saying, hey, this athlete he's phenomenal, he's fast, he's strong, he's got great range of motion, just don't screw him up. Go find out if he does have deficiencies on the field. And if so, then yeah, I mean, I love that point you made, is there's something that's not linking together there. So instead of just blaming someone else, why don't we try to figure out how to fix it?
Right. I think you also have to realize that we're all, between skill coaches, strength coaches, whoever's coaching at any physical quality, we're all coaching the same thing in some capacity. Like, the body doesn't know football versus lifting weights. It's a stress is a stress is a stress. Yeah. But at the same time, the physical output is just physical output all the time. So I know that's kind of philosophical, and that's kind of an abstract thought, but the skills coach should understand what we're trying to help him do, and we should understand what the skills coach is trying to get done. And we should both collaboratively know that player so well in and out, from a physical standpoint, a mental and emotional standpoint, that we can create an environment that's going to make that player better. And that's easily said and done very difficultly, because there's, we have 53 players. In college, you have 90 players. I mean, there's a lot of players to get that done with. But as you start picking off your bell cows, or your main players, the guys that are really going to make the plays on a Saturday, on a Sunday, or whatever day you're playing, once you start picking those guys off one by one and creating that environment, it gets a little bit easier to get the next one and the next one and the next one. So it might only start with 5 guys that you're really zeroing in on, and they have a very specific individualized program that you're taking everything from their hip architecture to what their squat looks like, and knowing that range of motion, to their previous injury history and the extra exercises they need to be doing on a daily basis, to what local site needs hypertrophy, what local site needs strength, what type of mobility training they need. And that's all on them to be able to understand and do, because you've done a good job educating them on that.
How much deeper would you break that down to? So, I mean, we've kind of taught this too, but obviously you have such a wide span of athletes, especially in the MAC level, because you have your walk-ons that, sometimes really are D2-3 caliber athletes. You have your bell cows, you have some of the guys that are upper level, and you have some of them in between. How much specificity would you put in your programming as far as segregating different tiers or levels, or have you thought about that, or what did you do at Southern Utah?
Yeah, I mean, well, at Southern Utah, I wasn't thinking on this level. I mean, right. It's like I've learned since I've been here, and I've adapted my thinking, because I've looked back and said, at Southern Utah, I was all about how many 300-pound cleaners could we have. And I'll tell you what, and my guys could clean the house very well with great technique, and I was very proud of that. We had 4 ACLs that year. And I was like, wow, we're strong. We squat full depth. We clean. Our posterior chain is strong. We have 30 guys cleaning over 300 pounds. Like how are we getting hurt? It just must be luck. It must be chance. It must just be, and that's the thing we kind of revert to is like, oh, we can't really do anything about it. And then as I went through and I left there, I was like, well, what were those guys' previous injury histories? I didn't know anything about them. I didn't know anything about those guys. I just knew that I was getting really strong and thought that was going to cure all. I see a lot of people be like, oh, strength cures everything. Well, it's a good patch for sure. So that disclaimer that I wasn't doing that at Southern Utah. I thought I did a really good job in interacting with people and getting people really strong, but that's one small piece of the pie. So to answer your question, I would do only the amount and maybe just a slightly less than my staff could handle.
Right.
Because you want to under promise and over deliver, and that's a big ask, right? It's a big ask to say, hey, we have these very individualized specific programs for you. And you don't want to get out of control where now your training just, goes down the tubes. So it might only start with 3 people if that's all that could be handled. And they might come in on different times, or they might be guys that can train very well and understand the importance of training. And you can give them a little bit of autonomy and say, hey, go over to your rack. I'm going to check in with you every little bit, but I'm not going to have to sit here and coach your technique every second of the day because you train well. I've taught you well. I've educated you. You've been trained in high school, or you've come through a very good lifting program. There's little pieces to it like that. And then hopefully, again, being intentional about it, you're putting people who are peer-to-peer in power so that they can drive that down the ranks. You don't want to put someone that no one likes on the team in that position because then it's like, I don't want to do what Jimmy does. Everyone hates Jimmy, I mean, it's just, you got to know your personnel and know what's going to be intentional in getting those players to buy into the program.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. You have to have that autonomy. There has to be some autonomy for that scheme to work. I mean, there's a few times in my career that I've tried it, and our program just wasn't ready. There wasn't.
Yeah.
There was either my coaches were too young, or I couldn't trust the athletes at that point in time enough. So yeah, I mean, I think I talk to a lot of coaches that I feel like they're too loose with the reins with that. Like it's like, and they don't have that culture yet. They don't have that ability just to give the players autonomy and say, give them some freedom. And I think do the opposite of what you said. I think they overpromise and they underdeliver.
Right.
And
the other thing is also sometimes in always questioning deeply held beliefs, and some of them are really hard interpersonal discussions, is how truly important is the discipline in the weight room. Like, I mean, as strength coaches, we're like, oh, it has to look perfect. It has to be like this, has to be like this. But guess what? That just makes our job easier when everything's in order. It's nice and neat and in order. We're able to coach a little bit easier. Well, can we go outside of our comfort zone and say, well, we're going to let it be a little bit more lax and we're going to give it a little more autonomy, and not everything's going to be perfect, but I'm able to handle the complexity of that, which is a difficult thing to do and maybe not even relevant. It may not be the right, but sometimes you got to think of like, why do we keep things so in order like that? Is it because football is a pretty structured game? Well, I would argue sometimes outside of the play, in between the whistles, it's not very structured at all. In fact, it's just chaos, right? Yeah. You're trying to trust your technique, but how many guys are perfect on their technique every time? Pretty rarely, right? You get away with things. You get away with a holding call. You get away with pass interference. There's like inside the whistles, there's very little discipline. Outside the whistles, very, very disciplined. So sometimes it's to me is like, well, we try to keep a disciplined weight room because football is a very disciplined and military style game. But is it really?
Yeah, I mean, I think you got to keep the important things the important thing. And that's, people ask me a lot about Mount Union, which, they've had a lot of success in their history of their program. And they're like, well, what did you guys were probably like, no one probably ever did this or that. And you guys probably all wore the exact same thing and no one did. And wasn't the case. But I'll tell you, the important things were the important things. And there wasn't like a whole laundry list of rules there. but the things that the head coach said, these are the important things about our program. You didn't question those things. You didn't move past those things. The important things were the important things, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that definitely.
Yeah. Well, I know we've been, you and I have talked about scope of practice before too, and about how, you know, in my opinion, and I think if I remember correctly, we were in agreement on this of just having a broad understanding of a lot of different things instead of always just looking through one lens is a pretty important factor. I know we've talked about nutrition a lot, and supplementation. Where do you believe that fits into the mold of everything? What place does that have? Talk about some of your philosophies with some of those kind of things as well.
Yeah. And the applications, you mean?
Yeah.
So I've always found it interesting that, you know, for some reason I got interested in nutrition. It's probably because I was a Charles Poliquin disciple and he preached nutrition. And, but I always found it interesting that strength coaches aren't really interested in understanding the nitty gritty of nutrition. Like even the basics, it's like, even the basics of nutrition. Like there's so many things that affect a strength program or let's just say performance in general. And the two most important are probably sleep and nutrition. And people say that all the time, but what does that look like? What does that mean? How do you apply that? What is the practicality of that? And the same thing we're talking about, how the different exercises might hit a different head of the hamstring and you need to bias someone in that way. Well, the way that someone eats also biases the training adaptation that you can affect, right? I mean, if we're trying to put on a lot of lean tissue, then we need a caloric excess. We need a certain amount of protein and a certain increased amount of carbohydrates. And we need to bias our meals every day, our snacks, everything that we're doing to make sure that we're hitting those type of foods on a consistent basis. Now, on the flip side, if you're trying to lose weight or change someone's body composition, well, we need to manipulate those variables pretty specifically. And it's not that hard to do. It's just more of an emphasis on something rather than another thing. So like it's, you know, you got to eat big to be big. I get it. Yeah, you definitely got to have an excess in calories, but how many feedings a day are you having? And what type of feedings are those? And what do those look like? And it's pretty easy to say to an athlete, hey, let's just make sure that if you look at your two palms, that you have this much protein on your plate at every meal. And you have 3 meals every single day. Can you do that? I mean, it's a very simple trick in terms of having 3 good protein feedings. And then in between meals, do you have a good whey protein product? Okay, well, that's great. Now you have 5 protein servings right there, and we're able to maintain our lean muscle mass while we're trying to lose weight. You know, you don't have to give them a specific ratio of, you know, grams per body weight, or anything specific like that. You can just give them landmarks of, hey, this is what your plate should look like. This is how many feedings you should have a day. How consistent really are you on that? What are your setbacks in terms of where do you go wrong? What are the foods that you eat that you know are affecting you from losing weight? What are the things you do on the weekend that you know that are affecting you? And then how important is it to the athlete, and having those conversations. But it just takes, like, you know, those intentional conversations, building relationships, building trust with people, and finding out what their roadblocks are, and then helping them overcome their roadblocks. But it's like I said, there's just so many factors that affect training, but nutrition is such an important one in creating that adaptation that I think it needs to be discussed more specifically more often, not just, hey, you need to eat better. What does that look like? Hey, you need to eat more vegetables. Well, what are vegetables? Which ones are going to help me the most? Which one are the easiest to cook? You know, well, hey, you need more carbohydrates. Well, what are the best carbohydrates to eat? Rice, potatoes? You know, some players are still like, what is a carbohydrate? I don't know what that is. You're speaking a foreign language to me. So, like, I say we need to talk about it more specifically, but it's just like digging a little bit deeper with the athlete is what I mean in terms of talking about it more specifically.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the hardest things, but the most important thing is just getting them to try it. Because I mean, how many people in your life, just general people, and how many athletes come to you with a host of, I have bad energy in the morning. I sleep like shit. My stomach always hurts, and I have all these issues, but they have a terrible diet.
Right.
And they don't understand that if you, and that's what I challenge guys to do is, listen, just follow this. I know you grew up in Miami, and I know you grew up and all you had was pizza and Tostitos every day. Okay, I get that. But now you have access to something. Just try to eat this way for a week and tell me how you feel after a week of eating like this.
Yeah.
And see how you sleep, see how you feel when you wake up, see how you feel at 2 o'clock in the afternoon when you actually have some energy, see how your stomach feels after a week. It's mind-boggling.
Yeah, and even easier than that, like a little trick that I used to do with guys was they'd ask me to write them a meal plan. It's always, hey, can I get a meal plan? And they're not trying to put me out in any way. They're just saying, what they're saying is, can you help me with my nutrition? I don't think I'm very good with my nutrition. It wasn't, hey, can you write me a macro breakdown?
Right.
They're basically saying, hey, what should I be eating? But since they told me that, they said, hey, that I need a meal plan. So, okay, I want you to do me one thing for the next week. And say, so today's what? Today's Monday. It's 5:15 p.m. When I see you next Monday, 5:15 p.m., I want the only thing that you've drank to be water. That's it. No juices, no milk, no alcohol, no tea, coffee. I don't care. This is the agreement we're making right now. 1 week, water only. And I want you to see how you feel. And they'll be like, I don't know about that, coach. And that's kind of hard. I mean, I go out on Saturdays. We do this. I love to drink orange juice, 3 orange juices every morning. That's what I do. And to me, it's like, okay, well, you're asking me to write you a very specific meal plan where I'm laying out what you should be eating, how you should be cooking it, how you're going to get access to these things. But you're telling me you can't just drink water as the only liquid that you're having for a week. It seems like we're in an impasse here. It seems like you're telling me that you're not willing to do what it takes to be successful nutritionally. And that's pretty tough because the water thing's pretty easy. You could just carry around a water jug for 7 days. That's all I'm asking, 7 days. And every guy that has done that always comes in and has been like, I feel great. I feel so much better. And it's just from changing what they're taking in their liquids. And the guys that come up to me and look me in the eye and they're like, I didn't do it. All right, well, I'll give you another week then. If you want to keep doing this. But how can I give you this advice or put you on a path to success nutritionally if you can't drink water as your only liquid source for a week? It seems pretty tough.
I'm gonna steal that one for
all
sure.
All yours.
Yeah, I overheard Coach McNally having a brief conversation with an athlete Friday in the hotel, and I went over there, and more or less the athlete was saying, we do a green supplement with a multivitamin and a probiotic in it. No, I don't take that shit. I can't take that. And I'm like, so you'll get under a squat bar and you'll squat 450 ass to grass in hopes that it makes you a better football player. But something as simple as drinking four ounces of this green supplement on a daily basis, that's where you draw the line. Like you can't do that. And that's where I have trouble linking that and just trying to understand their perspective.
Yeah. And sometimes drawing back a little bit and just saying, I mean, food's a funny one because people have very emotional ties to food. They have psychological ties to what food is like. They might have had bad experiences with vegetables or a certain type of food or certain flavor, certain texture. And there's a lot of food preferences that you're dealing with 20 years of food preferences where kids or players grow up in a certain area where they're heavily influenced in a certain way, fried foods or sweet foods. And they have these preferences that you're not going to break probably in the 4 years that you have them. But having the discussion of why that player doesn't want to drink that greens drink, well, I don't like the texture, I don't like the taste. Okay, well, can we add something to it that has a little bit of flavor so that you will drink it? Okay, cool, then we'll do that. It's like sometimes we just assume the worst on people and saying like, oh, you're just being a POS because you don't want to be better at what you're doing. In reality, it's like, well, I've had a bad experience with this. private experiences that I don't like to talk about, but here's where I am now. How do we now avoid that roadblock? How do we get over that roadblock? How do we help you, figure out what's the best way to approach this?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point too of just how to serve, and that's what Andy got a point on the point system board last week because
Nice job, Andy.
Well, I think that's the second one maybe since he's been here. But like we were doing, we're doing UCAN, and Coach McNally made it like cement before the Miami of Ohio game, and the players were all bitching about it.
I lost the point.
And Andy's, brought up the idea that to mix it with like Gatorade Zero or vitamin water Zero.
Yeah.
And we did that before last week's game, and guys loved it.
Yeah.
And it's the same supplement. It's cold. It's not so viscous, and it's better.
Yeah, love it. Good job, Andy.
All right. Last thing that you and I always talk about is just this concept of personal growth. And I know that you are a very much growth mindset human being. There are a lot of things that get in the way of people getting there. What is just some general advice you have to people out there on how to get out of their own way from just becoming a better human being at life?
Yeah. I think that I thought a lot about this one. I think that to get better, you got to find something that interests you and take a full head of steam at it and just learn everything you can about it. And then once you learn everything you can about it, experience as much as you can about it. And then once you experience as much as you can about it, question whether what you learned was right. And just do that over and over again for the rest of your life. Like a great example would be sprint training. I love track. When I'm 35, I'm gonna run track again in the Masters division and get just smoked. But I was a good athlete. I was pretty fast. I just love sprinting. I love competing. I love racing someone, being neck and neck with someone. And for a long time, I just coming out of the blocks. I ran hurdles in high school. I ran the 200. And they're always telling you, stay low, stay low, stay low, stay low out of the blocks, stay low out of the blocks. And so recently, over the last 5 years, I got really interested in sprint training and just watching track. And I started learning more about it, learning. And then I started experiencing it again and thinking it with a critical mind of like, do I want to stay low out of the blocks? I feel like, knowing biomechanics, I feel like it's a really bad position to be in. Like, I don't want to be bent over and hunched over in a position where I'm not powerful. Aren't you supposed to project out of the blocks and then project rhythm and rise right? And that's as what I started to experience of like, oh, well, that stay low cue doesn't really make sense to me anymore. But had I not learned it and experienced it, I may not have understood that's probably a cue that they're trying to say of like, for guys that are weak and can't stay in that projection position, people are like, hey, stay low. You're standing up too fast, because what they don't know is that they're weak and they can't stay in the 45-degree projection position. It's just one of those things. Same thing. I'll go back. I know I keep going back to the Nordic thing, but I just think it's just fresh on my mind because I think it's funny. Is like, okay, we take the Nord board. Well, I've been doing a lot of stuff just on myself of just testing my hamstring strength, which is incredibly strong, by the way, on the Nord board. And I noticed that as you go down, as you get towards the end, obviously we know in physics or like lever arms, biomechanics, lever arms, that this is going to be where you're creating the most force through the load cells because the lever's the longest, right? So when people are doing Nordics and they break at 45, are we really getting out what we need from that supramaximal eccentric dose? Now, in my head, I'm like, well, can I just do an isometric there and pull as hard as I can? Because that's the position where I'm trying to get the most force out of. And honestly, in sprinting, when we're looking at something like that, as the hamstring is getting lengthened at that position, that's where you end up seeing most hamstring injuries. So is the top of the Nordic even beneficial? I mean, but so you learn about it, but as you experience it and see these things, then you question whether what you learned was right or wrong. So those are like very specific examples in strength conditioning of what I'm saying. But you could do that in anything. You could just learn about things like passionately, experience it passionately, and then just question whether or not, now that I know the experience and I see a little bit more context about it, is that right or is that wrong?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a wildly large difference between I know I'm right and how do I know I'm right.
Right.
I think naturally, as human beings, we always want to know what we're doing right. The thing that I always constantly try to find when I evaluate our program or have, like when I had you come in, I want you to audit our program. I want you to try to. I respect your opinion, and I want to know what are we not doing right? What could we do better? I think people are way too uncomfortable in those scenarios, but that's the only way you grow. It's the only way you learn.
Sure.
You have to learn, but then you have to. How do I know I'm right? And keep on learning.
I think one more thing to add to that is that it's hard to get critical feedback from someone else. It's even harder to self-reflect and give yourself honest critical feedback.
Yeah.
And it's very unnatural to give yourself honest critical feedback. Like, did I do the right thing in that situation? And a lot of this goes in, and I could probably expand this in a direction we don't want to go in terms of like meditation and self-awareness of, as you start to get deeper into your understanding emotions and what you're doing, like you start to peel back layers of like, okay, if I got into a fight with someone about something and I was real dogmatic about something, is that because I think I'm right, or is it because I'm truly actually self-conscious about, I don't know if I'm right or not, but I've now put up this front where I know that I'm right. I'm going to argue it all the time. And and I get really upset at someone because I'm actually just self-conscious and I'm insecure about the point that I'm actually trying to make. So anytime that I feel myself doing that, I kind of have to step back and be like, okay, what am I insecure about here? When anyone ever gets sensitive about something that you tell them, it's usually some deeper insecurity or deeper underlying emotion that like they don't know about or you don't know about, but that's just kind of the laws of human nature. Great book, by the way. So like, again, that's probably a rabbit hole we don't need to go down on this podcast or anything, but it is interesting to be like, okay, what is some self-reflection that I can do? And what challenge can I give myself to say that I'm wrong at something that I've believed my entire life? And truly, and sometimes I really want to do that. When you asked about a staff that I would have, what I'd like to do is when people have an argument, they get to have the argument, but then they have to argue the opposite side to each other. And once you guys argue the opposite side to each other, then you guys can come to an agreement or an understanding of what each other is trying to argue, the other side of the facts, the other side of the emotional component of that. And maybe there's never any agreement that they come to, but I think that would be a really interesting experiment of how to be a little bit more introspective and how to be a little bit more like have a little bit more perspective on things.
I agree. Well, I always like to give these guys an opportunity as they're listening. If you guys have anything to fire away, so you got a couple more minutes there, Will?
I got all the time. Bye week,
baby. Same here. I wrote down a note when you were talking about, kind of the effect of what lax on discipline would look like in a weight room, football, and how that's really not what's accepted. I just wrote, what would be the correlation between the athletes who would benefit from this, and is there a negative effect who don't benefit from that type of discipline? Like if a guy doesn't love to be in the weight room, if you're forcing him to do it the way you want it to be done, is there a negative effect on his training?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that goes to your awareness of the room. Like I think every year you're going to have a different room, right? Every group you're going to have a different dynamic.
Yeah.
Sure. And you being aware of that, and that's all like the quote unquote culture side of things. Like people love to say, oh, we got culture. But it's really just like an awareness of how you can drive a group of human beings to collectively do something. So if you have a group of guys that are led by a pack leader who hates the weight room, good luck trying to get those guys to follow you as well when you're MFing the guy that doesn't like to be there in the first place or doesn't understand the purpose of it. That would be your role or responsibility to somehow find a way that that player is excited to be there. And it's probably not going to be by like intrinsic motivation, be like, hey, you're going to get better at football in this. It's gonna be more like, hey, we're going to let you lead this group today. And he gets to have a good time with, like, man, that was a lot of fun. I mean, I just made that up on the top of my head. But again, like that, you allowing the reins to be a little bit looser, sometimes for guys like the one that you just said, sometimes for those guys, it's what you give them wider boundaries and they stay within those boundaries, right? But if you squeeze it, the boundaries closer than they want to be, then they're just going to fight against it all the time. And it's going to be a headache for you. It's going to be a headache for him. It's going to be a headache for the team because the team's going to end up suffering from that. So it's just it's soft skills. And I don't know if there's a way to quantify that and say it needs to be like this, this, and this. But I think really good coaches know and can feel the room and can feel when things need to change. Or, again, you can say, okay, well, we did this 10 years ago and it worked really well. But right now, players are different. Players think different. They want different things. These players that we have are just not the same human beings as they were last year. They've developed in a different way, or they're just different people in general. We have a new ringleader. We have a new alpha male. We have the leader of the pack is different. So I think it would have to change year to year. And that's a hard thing to do because you have to revamp what you're doing. But I think it makes it exciting as a coach that you don't have to just come in and do the same exact thing every time. You get to make relationships with these people because you put a little bit more effort, and they see that and they understand that and they feel it. And I think everyone probably feels when the room is rolling and it's like, man, things are going really well here. And when the room is really uncomfortable and it's like, I'm just like, F you guys because you guys made me scream at you today. Yep. And they're all like, oh man, I can't wait for this to be done. It's just, this is bad, and we've all been there. It's just, having that feel and understanding and awareness of the room probably is probably where that lies. If that answers your question.
Yeah. I mean, it's just about taking the guy who already wants it to be done and not making him want it to be done even faster.
Right. Yeah.
I guess I can go. Will, I'd love to hear your take, just kind of building off one of the points you made earlier. Obviously we get a lot of guys that in our setting that are like, hey, can you write me up a diet plan? And I need to gain weight, I need to lose weight, whatever the case might be. And, all too often what I think we see is that we tell them what to do. It's not necessarily a lack of knowledge per se, but it's just a lack of getting those habits to stick. So I just love to hear your take on just diving in to just create some long-term habits with people.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard. I mean, that's the hardest part of it for anybody. I mean, us as strength coaches, we all have our bad habits or ones that we have to break. And we're the ones saying, constantly like, oh, you got to be like this, this, and this. You got to do this. And we find ourselves, going to have a drink out on Saturday. And, it's a little bit backwards sometimes like that. So everyone struggles with it. And admitting the failures first helps. Right. Admitting that, hey, I know you're not going to be perfect at this, and I'm not expecting you to be perfect at it. I'm not perfect at it. But let's talk about the roadblocks, because the habits usually fail because the roadblocks get in the way. So admitting that, hey, there's going to be some failure in here and that's okay, usually helps out with the psyche of it and then the structure of things. Like, yeah, coach, to be honest with you, I know you're saying that I should have chicken at this meal. I hate chicken. Okay, well, let's talk about what foods you do like. All right, well, coach, to be honest with you, you always get like, to be honest, coach, like, Friday nights, I go hard. I like to party. Okay, well, is it negotiable that you are not going to party? No, probably not. All right, well, then let's talk about some strategies that we can do so that, all right, so how about this?
Water, right?
What's that?
Tequila water.
Well, I never go down the path of telling anyone anything negative, like to do something negative. I'll just do anything as a stop loss. So like, all right, can you do like, why is it that you have to go so hard? Well, like, I don't want to be the guy at the party that's not drinking. Okay, well, that's fine. That's a good point. So you just feel like you need to have a drink in your hand. Yeah. Okay, well, can you, every other drink, can you just make that water? And then you drink half the amount that you're drinking now? I guess I could do that. All right, well, let's check in on Monday and see how you feel. And then play off the successes of like, how'd you feel the next morning? Well, I wasn't as hungover. That sounds great to me, dude. Like if you're the one trying to put on lean mass here, and usually you're hungover on Saturday morning, so you don't eat breakfast or lunch, and you feel like crap till dinner. Well, now you were able to drink. You're able to have fun. That's fine. I'm still not saying you should drink at all, but now you were able to have breakfast and lunch and dinner, and now we're in a place where you're having consistent meals. I like that a lot better as the option. So, like, you help them get over roadblocks. You celebrate the little successes of that, and you don't get deterred by the fact that you're probably going to have a lot of failure within there somewhere.
Awesome. Thanks, man.
Got anything, Andy?
Yep.
So this is actually a conversation I was having with Joe Clubb.
Hold on. Do you have a mustache?
Yeah, you like it?
Not particularly.
Damn it. So it was a conversation I was having with Joe Clubb, just regarding sleep. Like the biological clock for college kids is off 1 to 3 hours, and knowing that most college kids aren't getting enough sleep, would that kind of influence on how you program them from week to week?
Sure. I mean, yeah. That's, for those of you who don't know, Joe Clubb is our sports scientist with the Bills, and Andy was our intern, as was Connor.
You're just pumping them out for the Bulls, baby.
That's right. So, I mean, that's a good question. I think in general, knowing your limitations, you have to program for that. So, for example, at West Point, we had different development groups. We had an elite, an alpha, and a bravo. An elite was only the select few that could handle themselves and get their sleep, and their training was much more rigorous. We were pushing them to the brink, and we knew that they had the life skills to take care of themselves. Whereas the alpha guys, even if they was the strongest guy on the team or the captain of the team or whatever it is, if we didn't feel like that guy had the life skills to take care of himself, we would turn down the training a little bit in terms of intensity and the amount of training that we were doing and what types of lifts and the protocols, so that they could adapt a little bit better. And then the Bravo guys were usually like your young guys that needed to learn how to lift or didn't have any skills, or were just guys that we just kind of lumped in there. And then they could travel anywhere up and down those groups. So we didn't want to take the chance of injuring a guy who didn't have the life skills, because we wanted to push training super hard for that guy, even if that was necessary. Even if it's like, hey, this guy needs to get in shape. Okay, well, he doesn't have the physical or the life skills to physically do that right now, so we're going to get everything we can out of what we know that he can. Oh, he's still there. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool.
All right, Coach. Well, I know it's your bye week, so I don't want to eat up too much more of your time. And I get to go home and jump my wife's vehicle here. So I'm going to try to do that before the sun sets.
But
it's
Buffalo, so the sun set at 4, so you're done.
Yep. Well, I'm going to test my new flashlight out then, I guess, huh?
Yeah.
No, but seriously, man, I really appreciate it. And I know that there's so much stuff that we talked about, and I feel like it's tough to not get into super detail about each one of them. But I think the main thing that at least I want to take away for people listening is I envy your perspective and how you're constantly looking at things through different lenses. And I just think it's something that our industry needs to do more often, and not enough people are doing it. So I appreciate it's kind of why I wanted to ask the multitude of questions that are kind of all over the place, because I know you have a very interesting lens of how you look at each one of those things. And I just think that is, being more of a generalist, I just think that is where our industry needs to go, and I respect the hell out of you for it. So I appreciate you coming on, man.
Plug range, David Epstein. There you go. You just plugged it.
Dude, freaking nailed it, huh?
Yeah. I emailed him.
Did you?
Yeah, he emailed me back.
I just started.
There you go. That's a life skill. Every book you read, find a way to contact the author.
Yeah, I just started rereading Sports Gene. Sports Gene, right?
Sports Gene, yeah.
I just started rereading that yesterday, so I'm gonna dive back into that. But thanks, man. I appreciate you, and we'll be in touch soon.
Love it.
All right, bro.